Hi, welcome back to episode 3. And today we're talking about somebody super awesome who even worked as a Union spy. So let's just get right on into it. This figure was born around 1820 and was one of 9 children, born to enslaved parents in Maryland. Their mother was owned by Pattison Broadus, and their father was owned by Anthony Thompson. And this figure lived under the nickname Minty. Minty's early life was full of hardship as a slave, with physical violence being routine, and every day was almost a struggle to get through. There was even a day that Minty was lashed 5 times before breakfast, and they bore these scars for the rest of their life. But these lashings were almost nothing in comparison to her most grievous injury. The day was like any other, and Minty was sent to a dry goods store for supplies. Along the way, Minty had encountered a slave who had left the fields without permission, and this figure was met with their overseer, who demanded that Minty help restrain this slave. Minty refused and stepped between the overseer and the runaway. Angered, the overseer threw a 2-pound weight at Minty, which struck her skull. Minty stated later, "The weight broke my skull. They carried me to the house, all bleeding and fainting. I had no bed, no place to lie down at all, and they laid me on the seat of the loom, and I stayed there all day and the next." At this young age, this figure was left with vivid dreams, hallucinations, and narcolepsy. Because of their Methodist upbringing, Minty believed these hallucinations to be premonitions from God. Minty's family were always fighting for their freedom, and it was always just right there. Minty's father was freed at the age of 45, as stipulated in the will of his owner. Although similar stipulations applied to Minty's mother and all her children, the individuals who owned them chose not to free them. In 1844, although slaves are not legally allowed to marry, Minty got married to a man named John. But her marriage was not a good one, and her husband often threatened to sell her further south. Now, if he was another slave, this claim would have no leverage, but John was a free man. In 1849, she used the systems of houses and escape routes, called the Underground Railroad, to her advantage, fleeing to Pennsylvania. This was a 90-mile trek. She then found a job in Pennsylvania and saved up money. The following year, she returned to escort her sister and her sister's children to freedom. She then returned again to save her brothers. The third time she returned, she came to help her husband escape, but had discovered he had married another woman. Traveling by night and with a new nickname Moses, she helped free dozens of people. Because of her successes, she became known as the Black Ghost to slave owners, and they posted a $40,000 reward for her capture or death. Now, this number is debated, but $40,000 in 1850 is equivalent to over $1.2 million in today's money. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act allowed fugitive and free slaves in the North to be captured and enslaved. This made her job as an Underground Railroad conductor much harder and forced her to bring enslaved people further north, into Canada. They traveled at night, usually in the spring or fall when the days were shorter. She would carry a gun for protection and to, quote, encourage her charges who might be having second thoughts. Once, she threatened to kill anyone who lost their nerve to escape. She told a man, "You go, or you die." Now, this is not because she was mean or wanted to kill people. This is because she knew if any of them got caught running away, they would all be killed or enslaved again. She would even drug babies and young children to prevent slave catchers from hearing their cries. They avoided cops, dogs, mobs, bounty hunters, and slave catchers. They would sleep in swamps. During her work as a conductor, she helped save 50 to 60 people in 8 or 9 trips. She said, "I never ran my train off the tracks, and I never lost a passenger." Over the next 10 years, she befriended other abolitionists, such as Frederick Douglass, Thomas Garrett, and Martha Coffin Wright, and established her own place in the movement. Her very last trip to Canada was in December of 1860, when she brought up 7 people During her time as a conductor, and even after, she would help newly freed slaves find work. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, she found a new way to fight slavery. She was recruited to help fugitive enslaved people at Fort Monroe. She worked as a cook, nurse, and a laundress. While working there, her knowledge of herbal medicines proved to be life-saving. Her knowledge of local flora helped her find a cure for Union troops suffering from dysentery, and she also helped relieve some symptoms of chickenpox, cholera, and yellow fever. Then, she became the head of an espionage and scout network for the Union Army. She was even one of the best recruiters in the Union Army, creating an influx of newly freed slaves in the Army. In 1963, she was the first woman to lead a combat assault in the Civil War. With 150 men on June 2, 1863, Tubman guided 3 steamboats around Confederate mines in the waters of the Combahee River. This would be known as the Combahee River Raids. More than 750 slaves were rescued. Newspapers herald Tubman's patriotism, sagacity, energy, and ability. Tubman worked for 2 more years under the Union Army. She also made trips to visit her family and her mother. During a train ride to New York in 1869, the conductor told her to move from the half-price section to the baggage car. She refused and showed her government-issued papers that stated she was allowed to be there. He swore at her and grabbed her. She resisted and asked for 2 passengers for help. While she held on the railing, they pulled her away, breaking her arm in the process. As the men were tearing her from the railing, the other passengers were shouting at her and demanding that the train conductor kick her off, even after her arm was broken. They then threw her in the baggage car and worsened her injuries. This act of defiance became a historical symbol and was later cited when Rosa Parks refused to move from her bus seat in 1955. Despite Tubman's years in the service, she never received a regular salary and was denied compensation. Because of her constant humanitarian work for her family and former slaves, it was hard for her to make money. Her inability to get government pension left her in a state of constant poverty. She worked as a boarder to make money, and one of the men she took in was a farmer who had worked in the 8th United States Colored Infantry Regiment. He was currently working as a bricklayer, and they soon fell in love. Despite him being 22 years younger than her, they got married on March 18, 1969. They adopted a baby girl in 1874 and named her Gertie. Unfortunately, her husband Nelson Davis died in 1888 of tuberculosis. In 1873, she fell victim to a robbery and had $2,000 stolen. They stole her purse and bound and gagged her. A representative for the United States tried to make a bill that would $2,000 for her work in the Civil War, but it was shut down in the Senate. The only government pension she would receive is the money she got from her husband's death. It wasn't until 2003 that Congress would approve a payment of $11,750 to compensate for the money they owed. This was put to maintenance of her historical sites. In her later years, she worked to promote women's suffrage. A white woman once asked this figure if she believed that women should have the right to vote, and she replied, "I have suffered enough to believe it." She even traveled to D.C. to speak out in favor of women's voting rights, and described her actions in the Civil War and the sacrifices countless other women have made for their country. In 1897, after her work for the suffrage movement, she was honored in celebrations of her lifetime and her service to the nation. However, her endless contribution to others had left her in poverty, and she had to sell a cow to join these events. Because of her trauma throughout the years, and her fractured skull as a child, her seizures, headaches, and PTSD continued to hurt her. At some point in 1890, she underwent brain surgery to help ease the pain. She opted out of sedatives and chose to bite a bullet, just like they had done in the Civil War during amputations. Surrounded by friends and family members, Harriet Tubman died at the age of 93 in 1913 of pneumonia. She was penniless at the time of her death. Throughout her life, Harriet Tubman never got a break. even from the government she worked so hard for. But despite this, she still kept giving everything she had to other people. She never expected anything in return either. Maybe one day we can all be a little bit more like Harriet and give something to somebody else. Just because we can, and we should. I'm doing what I can to give you guys this video, but there's always more I can do. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I can't wait to see you guys next week. Have a great day. She was recruited to help fugitive slaves. She was recruited. Oh, la, la, la. She was recruited. 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 Ah ha ha. Why can't I say the word recruited? I did it again. She was recruited. Gosh. She was recruited. Recruited. I can't. She was recruited. She was recruited. Oh, I got it, but I didn't. She was recruited. I can't even finish the sentence. She was recruited to help fugitive enslaved people. She was recruited. What's a different word for recruited? Okay.